so much for joining us today. Welcome to the 18th Annual Lawson Lecture. This is actually one of my absolute favorite traditions of the fall semester. It's a chance when we get to learn from the author of the book that we all read and hear their perspective on their work and on the world. Tonight, actually, you'll have an opportunity to ask your own questions of Mónica Guzmán. So when you walked in, you were given an index card, and that's what that card is for. As you listen to the remarks on stage, even if you already have questions or curiosities, go ahead and jot those down on the note card. And then about halfway through our time, we'll have Viewceptors will come and collect those cards, and we probably won't get to all the questions, but we'll try to get through as many as we can. But before we start, I want to tell you a little bit about the Lawson Lecture itself. And specifically, I want to tell you about Reverend James Lawson, who is the person for whom the Lawson Lecture is named. Reverend Lawson has a story that's really worth knowing about. A civil rights activist, a theoretician, and pastor, James Lawson attended Vanderbilt University. And while he was here, he mentored a number of young students at Vanderbilt, Fisk, and other area schools in the tactics of nonviolent direct action. In Nashville, he trained many of the future leaders of the civil rights movement, and in 1959 and 1960, he and students worked with and launched the Nashville sit-ins to challenge the unfair, unethical, and often inhumane treatment of people of color in downtown stores and beyond. Vanderbilt in the 1960s was not the Vanderbilt we know today, and in fact, leading these acts of nonviolent protest were the very reason that Reverend James Lawson was expelled from Vanderbilt. It's kind of hard to imagine, based on our current context, that that kind of thing could happen, but it did. But what's important to know is that Vanderbilt recognized that as a problem, and publicly apologized to Reverend Lawson. And in a story of the ways that we can really overcome injustice and difference, in 2006, Reverend Lawson came back to Vanderbilt University, and he taught here from 2006 to 2009. It's in recognition of his work and his legacy and the many personal sacrifices he made to improve the lives of millions that the Lawson Lecture was named. Reverend Lawson has donated his papers to Vanderbilt libraries, and recently the College of Arts and Science and the Divinity School opened the James Lawson Institute for the Research and Study of Nonviolent Movements. The Lawson Lecture creates an opportunity for us to examine the world around us, to interrogate its structures, and to wonder about how to change them. Today we're honored to be joined by Provost Sibel Raver, who always has the final say in the campus reading selection, and who will introduce our speaker tonight. But first, let me take a moment to introduce Provost Raver herself. Sibel Raver serves as the Provost and Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at Vanderbilt University, an esteemed developmental psychologist whose leadership has spanned research, academic, and administrative settings. Raver oversees all faculty, staff, programs, and initiatives for Vanderbilt's 10 schools and colleges. Raver is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and is the Cornelius Vanderbilt Professor of Psychology and Human Development at Peabody College. Before her tenure at Vanderbilt, she was Deputy Provost at New York University. She's held faculty positions at the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy and Cornell University's Department of Human Development. Throughout her career, she's received prestigious awards from the American Psychological Association and the William T. Grant Foundation, and has been granted support from the MacArthur Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and the Spencer Foundation, in which she's garnered more than $24 million in funding. We are fortunate to be guided by her leadership, which influences both everyday aspects of Vanderbilt and the ways the university is poised to grow and change. Please join me in welcoming Provost Raver.
Thank you so much, Dean Grisalfi. Thank you for everything that you do here at Vanderbilt and for our students. Welcome, everyone. What an amazing, great thing to have everyone here. I know that they are also students in the overflow rooms. We're really thrilled to have you all here. It's truly a pleasure to be here tonight for so many different reasons. One is being able to share this space with you, our brilliant and engaged students and faculty, and of course with the remarkable Mónica Guzmán, whose book, I Never Thought of It That Way, serves as this year's campus reading. As Dean Grisolfi mentioned, I had a chance to read the finalists, and this was an extremely exciting choice. So thank you for making it as the selection. As you know, it serves as this year's campus reading, and it's a book that could not be more timely, as you all know. It teaches us how to have curious and courageous conversations during a deeply divided time, something that I think we as a campus and certainly as a society need to practice now as we have in past and as we will absolutely have to in future. I'll take a few minutes to talk a little bit about James Lawson's principles, a little bit about how well those principles fit or are demonstrated here tonight, and then a little bit about what I want you to do going forward. So, as you've previously heard, Reverend Lawson's impact at Vanderbilt has been profound and continues to be so. Though he passed away earlier this year, his lessons live on for all of us. He continues to remind us of the power that we have to pursue our highest aims of justice, peace, and equality when we lean into rather than away from difficult conversations, through love and nonviolence rather than derogating or diminishing those with whom we disagree. As we sit together this evening, I encourage all of you to reflect on how this legacy of love and dialogue can inform our dialogues and our actions today. It's easy to think that the challenges of polarization, inequality, and misunderstanding are new. But Reverend Lawson showed us that those have been with us for a long time, and he showed us the path forward through empathy, through affirmation of both our own and each other's worth, and most importantly, through open conversation. That brings me to why we're here tonight. This year's campus reading, I Never Thought of It That Way, is the perfect guide for the conversations that we aim to have here at Vanderbilt. Mónica challenges us to engage with people who see the world differently than we might, to listen with curiosity, and to embrace the discomfort that often comes with those exchanges. At Vanderbilt, we valued civil discourse because it is critical to the work that we do in our classrooms, our labs, and every corner of this campus. It is the Vanderbilt way that we really frame as our principles of belonging, of fostering a space where every voice matters, and where differences in perspective are celebrated as an opportunity for discovery. You've heard me say this in many different meetings and with many of you in different groups, that discovery is the opportunity we have at a university, an opportunity for seeing a question or a solution in a new way, and often through the eyes of others. Mónica's book underscores this beautifully by giving us practical tools to navigate those conversations. So what is it that I want you to leave here tonight with? What is it that I want you to do as your provost, as your chief academic officer? As many of you know, this year's theme is embracing the debate. And as we approach an election year, these skills of dialogue and open-mindedness will be even more critical. Our hope is that Mónica's book and the conversations that it inspires will be catalysts for deeper and more meaningful interactions across campus and beyond. And that's where I ask you to enter in with me as leaders in this effort. I really challenge you to see yourselves and to step into that role as leaders. As leaders, you play a crucial role in setting the tone for how we engage with one another at Vanderbilt. Every meal you share, every discussion you participate in, every time you listen to someone with a different viewpoint, you are modeling the kind of constructive, courageous dialogue that is essential for building a stronger community and for being at that cutting edge of discovery. So tonight, as we kick off this event and this meeting, that's what I want you to do. I want you to honor Reverend Lawson's legacy by engaging with one another with compassion and curiosity, by leading with integrity and purpose, and by embracing the work of truly understanding one another. Sometimes, I'll be honest, that work is hard. Most of the time, I think that work is exciting. And for sure, I know that 100% of the time, that work is absolutely necessary for us to move forward together as a community, as a nation, and in the world. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our author tonight. It's really exciting to introduce Mónica Guzmán, a bridge builder, a journalist, an author who lives for great conversations sparked by curious questions. Welcome, Mónica. I'll tell you a little bit about Mónica. She's amazing. She's a founder and CEO of Reclaim Curiosity, an organization working to build a world that sees itself, senior fellow for public practice at Braver Angels, the nation's largest cross-partisan grassroots organization working to depolarize America, and host of A Braver Way, a podcast that equips people with the tools they need to bridge the political divide in their everyday lives. Guzmán's book, I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times, has been featured in the New York Times, the Glenn Beck podcast, Reader's Digest, and U.S. News named it as one of the 10 best books to read before college. Mónica received an honorary doctorate degree from Wheaton College. She's completed study and research fellowships at the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard, the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, and the University of Florida. Mónica serves as an advisor for Starts With Us and the Generations Over Dinner Project. She's served not once but twice as a juror for the Pulitzer Prize, which has got to be an awesome, cool experience. And one of the things that I love about Mónica is that she's also a real human, in addition to being a superpower celebrity author. She plays a barbarian named Shadrach in her Besties Dungeons & Dragons campaign, Go Dungeons & Dragons, D&D. She is, as a Mexican immigrant, Latina, and a dual U.S.-Mexico citizen, also a resident of Seattle with her husband and her 2 kids, and she's a proud liberal daughter of her conservative parents, and I want to welcome her parents, who are sitting in the front row. We're thrilled to have you. Mónica, we are so thrilled to have you here to guide us in this work. Your book has already sparked so many important conversations across campus, and I know tonight's discussion will continue that momentum. Joining her for this discussion, we have 3 students as well. Achua Garuba, I hope is it Achua, thank you. Garuba is a junior double majoring in public policy studies and law, history and society, with a minor in data science. Classic Vanderbilt undergraduate list of majors and minors. Originally from Atlanta, Georgia, she's passionate about making a difference in her hometown and communities across the United States and abroad. At Vanderbilt, she serves as the Attorney General for Vanderbilt Student Government, works as a research assistant at the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, is president of VandyVotes, and participates as a member of Women in Government's Public Service Committee. She's also interned at Triumph Strategies and Leading Edge Africa, and has served as an election clerk in her hometown. So wonderful. And I'm going to keep going, and then we'll clap at the end. Scout Halligan is a third-year Chancellor Scholar studying political science, economics, and data science. She works as a residential advisor and is involved with Amnesty International and the Vanderbilt Prison Project. Scout is passionate about democracy and human rights, and she plans to pursue a career in law. And Gerard Montero is a second-year student in the College of Arts and Science. He's planning to major in economics and political science with a minor in business. He's from North Brunswick, New Jersey, and after experiences with free speech initiatives in high school, he became a part of Dialogue Vanderbilt to help foster a culture of open expression and free speech on campus. So to everyone here, thank you so much for your commitment to being leaders in building a community where every voice is heard, where every person belongs, and where we can all learn from one another. I look forward to the ideas, questions, and reflections that will emerge from this conversation tonight. Thank you, and welcome again. Congratulations, all of you, for being so expert and amazing. And let's get this evening started. Thank you.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Oh, hi. Hi, Mónica. Thank you so much for coming to Vanderbilt. We're so excited to have you here. So we all read your book, I Never Thought of It That Way. And I just wanted to ask you to start, why was this a book that needed to be written? And to reference your book a little bit, why you?
Why was this a book that needed to be written? I've often talked about how it just had to come out of me. I probably had the idea 2018, 2019. In Seattle, I ran a publication and was sensing a lot of pressure from the city itself to have the publication take a side, especially after the 2016 election, which was so contentious. And a place like Seattle that's so leaning liberal and democratic, it also had a lot of the anxieties that were circling through that community all across the country at that time. So I was thinking about that. I was thinking about how difficult it can be to stay open to many perspectives when the stakes feel so high and fear starts to come in. And also, my parents, while I was observing as a journalist this craft of trying to tell stories into an increasingly divisive climate, and then as a citizen of Seattle, I was witnessing a place really come into its political leaning so strongly that it became really hard for someone who happened to be Republican or conservative to be heard. And something in me said, something feels incomplete, like it's hard for us to see the whole picture this way. Me and my parents were having the kinds of conversations that were so challenging at that time. And we became citizens in the year 2000. We came from Mexico. And immediately back then, they went Republican, I went liberal Democrat, and the arguments began. But like many families across the country, it was around the 2016 election when they got white hot. And what happened was, and I'm able to describe this after, was throughout all of that heat in our conversations, I sort of realized that for the most part, we were able to keep things to a simmer. And in cooking, right, a simmer's pretty good. You're cooking, you're making something new. We're cooking up understanding, we're cooking up some knowledge, cooking up surprises. But of course, if it goes too far, it gets too hot. If you don't have enough liquid, if you're not tending it right, it can burn. You can burn a relationship, you can burn trust. And somehow we kept it to a simmer. And I thought to myself, there's so much pain around this country that I can see, and so much of what feels like we're so divided, we're blinded, we're not able to see debates for what they really are, that I know that there are tactics, there are practices that we can do. I think me and my parents may have accidentally discovered some of them, and I am now going to obsess about finding out what other people know and try to put it into a book and put a happy yellow cover on it with some pretty pastel eyes, maybe to try to communicate that this might be easier than we think, that we may not be in such a position of despair and hopelessness, that as people, we can get something done in our own lives. So that's where it came from.
Hello. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Throughout your entire book, you talk about the importance of curiosity, and curiosity being a tool to see why people believe what they believe, right? And so, you have a storied career as a bridge builder, as a journalist, an author, of course, and fittingly a journalist, right? And especially during this politically divided time, it's so important that we're able to kind of honestly converse with each other and talk about each other's stories. And so my question is, how do you tell someone's story, and how do you ensure that you understand their story at the same time?
So how do you tell someone else's story, you're saying?
Yeah, especially in your career as a journalist, how do you tell someone's story and then make sure that you understand it yourself?
What a great question. Well, I learned this early in my career, and I wrote about it in the book, that initially I was so nervous in my interviews that I would show up with a list of questions that was like a checklist for me, and I would just go down the list, because that's what I thought doing a good job as a journalist was. But what I realized was that's how to tell the story I think that person has to share. That's how to put the conversation with my frame and to seed the way to my assumptions about it. When I was doing that, I wasn't listening for what the story actually is, for where people might surprise me and want to take things in different directions. So that's a big part of it. The way I've learned to try because it's always an effort, to tell someone else's story responsibly and accurately is to step into them and step kind of out of yourself. So it means you have to notice your assumptions and question them. You have to suspend them. And it means you look for what I call driving questions. Questions like, why do you do what you do? How did you come to believe what you believe? Look for those kinds of questions. A driving question is a question that you cannot get a satisfactory answer by asking it once. It becomes almost like an umbrella question. You know, why do you believe what you believe? How did you come to believe what you believe? Why do you do what you do? Which is one of my favorite questions. You ask it, and then a person might bring up a story from their lives, or they might bring up a value, or something like that, and then you listen. You listen for the meaning. You watch their body language. You hear where they're getting excited. Sometimes people leave breadcrumbs, and they want you to ask. And part of what makes learning somebody else's story quite easy is that so long as you are expressing a genuine and respectful interest, it's a real gift for someone to be curious about you. It's a real gift and a rare kind of honor that someone else bestows on you. Most of the time we get in conversation and, you know, something comes up, like I'm telling you about it, the trip I took to India recently, I was telling you about it, right? And naturally what we would do is someone would jump in and say, oh, I went to Rajasthan too, right? And it becomes a back and forth, and that's great. But what that means is that most of the time we don't even have 2 or 3 minutes of sustained curiosity about someone else's story. So asking more questions about their experience, staying in their frame, staying in that story, listening deeply and closely. And when you do that, like I've found that I can just disappear into it, and then it becomes so fun to watch the person I'm interviewing discover why their own story is more interesting than even they knew. That's super fun too.
And can I just ask a quick follow-up too? You mentioned your background growing up in Seattle, and Seattle maybe swinging one way. Given your background growing up in Seattle, was it ever harder for you to tell other people's stories and understand people's stories who maybe didn't agree with you?
Absolutely. Oh, 100%. And mostly it's because of a climate of distrust. I'm a journalist in this city, and there seems to be a dominant culture, and if somebody doesn't have that dominant view, they're going to suspect me, they're going to suspect the result of the story. They would rather not put their trust in someone. And so it's like a whole culture, climate kind of a thing. It's very difficult for one person to try to reverse that trend on their own. It takes a little more kind of extended pluralism. So yes, that was tough, but what I tried to do, really where it began was finding my own courage, because I would internalize all those judgments and stereotypes and preconceived notions, you know? I would sort of say, oh gosh, if I give voice to this conservative person in my story, I'm gonna hear from my readers. They're not gonna like it, and so maybe I shouldn't, right? But that's why I should. So it really begins with your own courage. And just knowing that you're gonna be telling a more complete and responsible picture about most issues if you're not trying to just narrow it to what people expect.
Hello. This on? Perfect. So you talked about in Seattle how it was this big blue sea of, you know, like liberalism, and there were a few conservatives who might have found it hard to tell their story. But I feel like so often in life you meet somebody who has one view. Let's say they have a certain view on gun rights. Let's say they're pro-guns, you instantly affiliate so many more views with them and put them into these binaries of conservative, like Republican and Democrat, and you affiliate so many views with them which they might not have. And looking back at ourselves, how can we see people as human in like their whole context and not instantly associate someone's opinion with their whole identity, to reframe our conversations away from the binaries of red and blue, instead just to who am I and who are you? That rhymed, you know?
I mean, that question's part of the answer. It begins with the intention. Because again, most of the time, we don't have time to stop and inquire about every single action we're doing. We don't have time to check every assumption we have. You know, there's lots of assumptions we make all the time, and it's just for living life efficiently. So Yeah. I think it really does begin with the assumption, understanding that no matter how informed you think you are, no matter how educated you think you are, nobody is immune from motivated reasoning. Nobody is immune from the psychology of, one line I put in my book, whoever is underrepresented in your life will be overrepresented in your imagination. Whoever you're not as familiar with, it will be more easy for that person to begin as a caricature and stay a caricature in your mind. And you're not going to be able to sit down and go, take out that list of people from your brain and go through with a fine-tooth comb, before you get into these situations and just check and make sure that you're not doing that. We do that all the time. So, yes, and I think then the prescription there is, I think of it as low-risk exposure. A lot of folks get nervous about talking to somebody who is different from them because they think of the most extreme difference first. And they talk about that, and that seems so scary and so unlikely. But talk to a friend that you know, and you know that you disagree on this one issue, and practice that. And then talk to somebody with a little more difference and a little more difference. This reminds me of a wonderful story I heard from John Powell, who's this lovely, incredibly wise bridge builder. And he talks about a pastor who asked him, "John, do you want me to bridge with the devil?" And John said, "Maybe don't start there. Build short bridges. Build short bridges, not the long bridges. And after a while of building short bridges, you'll ask yourself who you're calling the devil." So it may be, depending on the issue, depending on the relationship, some of these bridges will take a long time. And not to mention, other people may not want to engage. There might be a lot of distrust. But it is exactly as you say. None of us is just the sum total of our opinion. Our political opinion is not our identity. But it can be a really interesting, illuminating window into the path we've walked to that view and the path we've walked to the person we are. And, trying to illuminate each other that way can build trust and build relationships, which then gets you to actually debate the toughest issues that we're also stuck on. And then we can get somewhere.
Yeah, that's a great point, Monica, and a great question posed by Gerard. And I think it has a lot to do with decoupling these things that we oftentimes, or too often, right, kind of pair together as automatic things, right? My next question, is I think from reading your book, I could sense that you would argue that just about everyone is worth listening to at least, right? And listening, being in this country, right, during such divided times with people with such different perspectives, it can be hard, especially in this age of misinformation and disinformation, to really navigate that. And right, we can see that with AI now, especially in this age of social media algorithms, right, kind of putting people in echo chambers or media silos where people are really only getting information that they already were preconditioned to agree with. And so my question is, how do we have discourse when we don't have a shared set of facts, when people are able to kind of select what is true and what is false?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of times what I've observed is that if there is a disagreement on what is perceived to be basic facts, people see really two options. One is abort, gotta get out of here. The other is do whatever it takes to convince this person they're wrong, whether I need to shame them or, show them this link until they change their mind, that kind of thing, because we don't have these shared facts. And the way through this comes from a friend of mine, Buster Benson, who's an amazing author. He wrote a book called Why Are We Yelling? He talks about how there are 3 types of conversations across disagreement. The conversation about what is true, the conversation about what is meaningful, and the conversation about what is useful. So in that stuck scenario, people think the only conversation you can have across disagreement is the conversation about what is true. And when you get to kind of a wall there, I guess you're done. You either attack or you retreat. But the thing to do is to switch from the conversation about what is true to the conversation about what is meaningful. So what's the conversation about what is meaningful? That one is a conversation that can be informed by asking questions like, tell me what you're concerned about. I can tell you care deeply about this, and I know we don't agree on some things that feel really core to me, but I can tell that you really care about this, so tell me what's concerning you. And so you'll end up in a place where you do start to build trust, because we're no longer arguing about what is true or what isn't true and kind of getting stuck there. Now I'm asking you about you. And that can illuminate so much. I remember, actually, I mentioned it in the book. But there's so many examples where you get to that place and then you ask the person, tell me about this story for yourself. Tell me about the path you walked to and through this. And suddenly it just changes the conversation. And what is also true is that we can't as a society build a collective sense of what is true without trust. So the number one problem right now, we think it's lack of agreement on what is true, but it's actually deeper than that and a prerequisite of that. It's that we have lost trust. We have lost the kinds of pools of trust that allow us to be honest and open with each other to begin with. And so we're convinced we live in different realities and never the two shall meet. Some of us need to be brave enough to build that trust. The idea is that often we come into these conversations going, in order for me to, you have to show me that you share my sense of reality to earn my trust. But what if it takes trust to build a shared reality? We have to flip that on its head. We're not going to get to a shared reality unless we build trust first.
So building off of what you said about trust, I know that that's the foundation of all meaningful conversations. And so out in the crowd, we've got a lot of freshmen and a lot of people who really want to make connections, but it's scary. You're in a new place. So I want to know how day to day can you initiate these meaningful conversations in a way that's not so scary and in a way that builds trust even in the digital age where sometimes people, you don't think they're really listening, or maybe they're going to go and tell everyone what you said. How do you go about that just in your regular day-to-day life?
Yeah, great question. A lot of times, maybe because we're such a productivity-driven culture, especially on college campuses, you all have your tasks and assignments, and you just got to get it done in the time allotted. We tend to approach conversations the same way. I'm going to have a conversation with this person. It might last an hour. I don't know. That's the time I've given for lunch. And in that hour, I expect that my questions will be satisfied or that we'll get to some conclusion or what have you. But the best way really is to not even make it so heavy. So I've heard from folks who there's been so much pain in families, as I was saying, and I'm thinking of one person whose relative is much more far left than they are, and it really kind of irritates them, and it's tough. But she wanted to understand them a little bit better. So it was about coming into that house, seeing that MSNBC is on, and just asking kind of a quick question. Rachel Maddow just said something. Oh, yeah, what do you think about that? And letting the person go, oh, blah, 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 this is blah, 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 blah. Okay, leave, right? That's not the moment to argue. That's the moment to listen. And then, then another time, well, maybe we did it again. The next time, actually, she said, I just sat down next to her and watched MSNBC with her because it matters to her and she cares about it. And, this time I really kind of listened and I watched her reaction. And then later at dinner, kind of brought it up. Hey, noticed when they brought up immigration, you had a really interesting reaction. I wonder about that. So it's sort of lead with the curiosity. Take the judgment and put it way in the back, and put the relationship in the front. And, what she also said was that a lot of the things that she had in her head about why this person had the views that they had just turned out not to really be true. And getting close enough to see that really helped them get their relationship back on track. So it really is, it's bit by bit. It's, oh, cool, you read this news source. Yeah, what kind of stuff do you like in there? Oh, so I read this other thing, Okay, that's it. We don't have to have the debate right now. Just demonstrate that you are capable of receiving each other as you actually are. And then maybe the door might open for a little more.
So my question actually also builds off of what Scout just said. And this is right now, you're looking at this crowd of 1,600 freshmen, right, who are going to live the rest of their college experience, the rest of their lives. If there's one message that you can impart on everybody who's listening here today, one message, one mantra for them to go forward, to live their lives, maybe not in their meaningful conversations, but for them to go and spread that to who they know, to hopefully start, a little movement that you were talking about. What's the one thing that you would tell everybody listening here today? If you could only take away one thing from my book, this is it, and this is what I want you to go spread.
Every time you say one thing, it adds pressure. I'm like, oh my God, I have 100 things. I don't know. Boy, I have 100 things. But maybe the topmost thing is that this is about incremental steps. Wherever you feel most anxious about crossing a divide on perspectives, just keep that in mind, that you don't need to do the long bridge. It can be asking one more question before you give your opinion. It can be bringing up one more conversation that you wouldn't have done otherwise. It can be that simple. And the closer you get, the more likely you will discover that whatever seemed so scary may not be that scary at all. And it really can make an otherwise difficult time a little bit easier. I've been really impressed by that. Folks in the bridge building space, a lot of us and a lot of the folks who are a little closer to this work, it's just, the world becomes less scary and you can see more solutions everywhere.
Thank you. I mean, I know obviously tonight, as we all know, the first presidential debate's happening, so I think that is a pretty important message for anybody who's watching.
There is a watch party at Commons tonight.
Yeah, and I think I'll be there with those two. We'll see.
Yeah, thank you. And now, Dean Grisolfi.
Okay, so thank you so much. These were amazing questions. So now is a good moment for you all to sort of pass your cards to the edges so folks can come and pick them up. And so while that's happening, I have the privilege of asking the first question. But you don't need to talk.
We love conversation, but
Monica, can I ask you a question that I know lots of students have been talking about on campus, which is, can you share a little bit about just one strategy when someone says something to you that really hits you in your angry bone? What would you suggest people do in that moment?
Yes, great question. So, the most important thing is to take a beat. Because we tend to be on our default settings and because we tend not to develop a lot of self-awareness, we tend to externalize our awareness in tough conversations, right? It's like, oh, they're making me mad, they're doing these things, and I have apparently no power over myself. Like, no. You actually do. So this happens to me all the time. I notice that something has triggered something in me. And it might be accompanied with an emotion that immediately wants to sweep me up into something, sometimes a judgment. I'll tell you that for me, the thing that still makes me so mad is whenever I think that somebody is willfully not admitting something obvious, like completely obvious to me. Oh, do you see my body language right now? Like, oh God. Like that just, But for lots of people, it can be so many things, something about a particular issue. So taking a beat, taking a breath, being able to notice that that's happening. Now on anger, there's a woman named Valerie Kaur who wrote a book called See No Stranger, and she says, anger is a force that protects that which is loved. So anger, like fear, like so many of these emotions that can get us into trouble are also really necessary and really quite lovely. So I reflect to myself, what's going on? What's going on? And so it depends, like, am I cooking something? Am I burning something? Only I can tell in that moment. If it's really hot and really bad, then I need to use a strategy to get out of that situation. And that's the main thing. Just, you know what? I think this is as far as I can chat about this right now. Maybe I'll talk to you later, and then just duck out. Or sometimes you can name it, and you can say, you know what? What we're talking about right now is, I can tell it's making me kind of upset, but I want to keep listening. I just want to signal to you that, there's a conversation with myself going on in here. Like sometimes if you've developed enough trust, you can do that. And it can be really powerful to stay in the heat, but only you know if that heat is cooking something or burning something. And if it's burning something, get out, come back later.
So before you ask your question, Gerard, I just want you all to know what I'm doing up here in case it looks very weird. Lots of people ask some of the same questions, and sometimes people's questions we've talked about a bit, so I'm just going through in our limited time, like an example of questions that lots of people are asking. So take it away.
So one thing that might make people mad is watching the news, right? So shout out to Sledge Thatcher for this question wherever you are, Sledge. But Sledge asks, should the news media be more neutral and show both sides of the aisle, think Democrat, Republican, or should we just aim to listen to both sides of the spectrum, like MSNBC and Fox?
Great question. In a way, that question's asking, where is the burden? Where is the burden on establishing a culture of pluralism? Should we demand that media do it, try to control that industry, or really push that industry to do it? Or should we take that burden on ourselves, that responsibility? And I guess what I would say is that pragmatically, I don't know how in a really free and open market-driven society, we're not going to have a media that responds to the economic incentives that are there. And we know that outrage and fear, we've all been there. It pulls you in. It leads to clicks. There will always be media that are going to be primarily motivated by that. It's going to be difficult not to have that. But there are media that are doing incredible work. I highly recommend a newsletter called The Flip Side. It's the only political newsletter I read. And it takes every weekday one political issue and shows you the best, really most thoughtful, amazing commentary on the left and the most thoughtful, amazing commentary on the right. And when they lead with the left, on the editions that they lead with the left, I read it because I'm on the left and I'm like, oh yeah, oh my God, of course, great point. There's obviously no other way to think about this. And then I start reading on the right, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good point. Okay. And I still know where I land, and most of the time it's on the left, but I emerge a lot more illuminated. So I think we have to take some of that responsibility ourselves. Now, it doesn't have to be just finding those miraculous news sources that do such a good job of this, whatever. It can also be paying attention to even how you read an article. So if you're on social media and you see this meme or this headline, like, yeah, and you click on it, be conscious that you're already, like, looking for red meat. Just be conscious of that in yourself. Because if you're not conscious of it, you are theirs. And whatever they're going to say, you're going to add the ammo into your belt, you're going to go, and you're not going to listen to your own skeptical voices or your own voices who say, I don't know that they've done that much. It seems like they kind of quoted just like one source here. Maybe it's anonymous. Like, this seems like a bit of a stretch, Those voices will not talk if you are hungry for red meat as you read. So as you read, ask yourself, what are the deep down honest concerns, that are going on in this article? Like, what's really going on, and how are they expressing it? One last thing real quick is that these are really good tips to help yourself read something that you disagree with. A lot of time you'll see a headline and you hate it. You hate it immediately. It's terrible. because you hate it. You don't agree with it. But maybe it's on a really, really popular opinion on the other side, right? So you're like, okay, let me give it a try. Click on that. Then ask yourself 2 questions. What are the deep down concerns, animating this perspective? And then, what is the strongest argument on this side that I can like really generously try to find in this article? And you really can do that even with the most inflammatory, commentary. You can still look for that because people use anger. Anger is supposed to be doing work. What work is it trying to do? What's it trying to protect?
Awesome. Thank you.
That was good. So the question I received says, what is your perspective on navigating conversations and relationships with people whose political views directly contradict with your identity or interfere with your rights as a human?
Yes, thank you for this question. I feel like I need to breathe on this one a little bit, because this is probably one of the most difficult. What appears to be true and unavoidable is that in most spaces in the world, we do not have a perfectly utopian culture where all types of people are like glitteringly represented in their culture. If you go through history, it's been much worse. And if you step back through history, it appears that there is somewhat of a trend line of we appear to be learning lessons about how easy it is to unsee whole groups of people. We appear to be overcoming those tendencies bit by bit. We appear to be more immune in certain societies with certain, values. We appear to be getting better. But are we completely immune? No, we're not. And it just by sheer psychology, people whoever is underrepresented in your life will be overrepresented in your imagination. People get scared of what they don't understand. And that can be really hard. And if there isn't enough exposure and enough friction of human to human, we get stuck in these stories. So all of that to say, this is super, super hard right now. I think of the tension between being safe and being seen. If you hold an identity where you live with the consequences of political debates in a particularly deep and sharp way. The tension between being safe and being seen. So if you go all the way toward being safe, don't talk to anybody. Just stay here. Don't try to share your story or build trust with people who are too different, because it might hurt you. If you go all the way toward being seen, you're out there all the time, you're gonna get maybe hurt, you're gonna get asked some awkward questions, it's gonna be laborious and potentially dangerous and all of these things. But the thing is, there's got to be some place in the middle. There's got to be some place in the middle, because if too many folks who live with the consequences of debates go toward being safe and do not communicate or share space with folks who don't understand them in any way, then how will they be seen? How will the culture eventually embrace? If you go too far toward being seen, again, that's just a lot to take. I don't know if you all have heard of Daryl Davis. He's sort of a legend in this space. He's a black blues musician who, after a gig, heard a table of older white men say horribly, horribly, horribly racist things, and made a very unusual choice. No one would have blamed him at all, might have even encouraged him for, maybe yelling at them, telling them what's what, or just getting out as soon as he could. It turned out these were card-carrying white supremacists, actually official. He sat down with them, which I am not saying that is what you, no. Fast forward, and Daryl Davis has a collection of more than 200 Qlux Clan robes from people who, in conversations with him and getting to know him, realized the absurdity of their hate. So I'm talking about what's possible, not what's practical. You cannot deny the impact of 200 fewer card-carrying Ku Klux Klan members. But it also doesn't have to be everybody. It doesn't have to be everybody. But it comes back to that takeaway that I was saying before, where it's like, if we just remember that it can be small steps, you know? Like, if it's somebody that you think doesn't believe you should exist, let me tell you what actually the best argument is. The best way to argue with someone who thinks you shouldn't exist is to continue to exist in their presence. You don't have to open your mouth. You don't have to say a word. Can I give one more story on this, or are we like?
Yes, absolutely. We have one question after this. So.
Okay. So I just want to tell you guys something that happened to me that really illustrated this to me, and it's, just gonna be open with y'all. Several years ago, I was in Seattle and meeting a friend at like a theater rehearsal, something like that. And someone comes up to me and introduces themselves. And I noticed very quickly that they have huge earrings, like really, really big, like down to here. And one of them says they, and the other one says them. And I had not seen this before, personally. And what started then was a conversation with myself. Like, I said hi to them, they walked off, and for the next 20 minutes, while I was waiting for my friend to be finished with her performance, I had a conversation with myself about pronouns. Because this was new to me, I'm a millennial, this was new. And I was clearly uncomfortable with it, and I thought about it, and I put myself in their shoes, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and in the end of those 20 minutes, I was more comfortable with they, them pronouns than I was in the beginning. And that person didn't say anything. So it's important to remember that when we have conversations with other people, there's really two conversations going on. The conversation with the other person and the conversation with yourself. And the conversation with yourself never ends. Never ends. You're finished talking with that person. The impact of that conversation could still be working on that person later. You don't know. Or just the impact of an interaction. You may not have to open your mouth.
Hello. So I think the last question we have today, and I think this is pretty fitting given the event happening later tonight, is how do you feel about the presidential debate tonight?
I feel...
I know how I'm feeling, but I'm curious about how you're feeling.
Give me your feelings in one word.
Oh, gosh. Anxious.
Anxious? Yeah, that's a good one. Really, it's curious. I know that sounds cliche. I'm super curious because debates like this are performances. They are performances. And on such a big stage with so much at stake, mostly what I watch when I watch a debate, I'm actually most curious about the reaction to the debate. What is the day after the debate? How are me and my parents going to react watching tonight? Like, I'm curious about that. What are we going to hear that's going to make us excited? Or what reaction do I see in them that I go like, oh, Dad, like, Trump said that thing about immigration and you winced. Like, tell me why. Like, what's going on? So it's more about that. It's how these debates, they look like they're about two people, but they're not. They're about all of us. So I look at that. How are these two larger-than-life people who purport to have so much power, between them and hanging in the balance? It's like they only have power because we give it to them, and we need to know who we are.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to say you all are endlessly curious yourself, and I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to get through this huge stack of questions, although I will say lots of people asked the question about identity, and so I'm glad we got to talk about that. So if you want to watch the debate tonight, it's on at 8 o'clock. We're going to watch it together for anyone who wants to join in the Commons multipurpose room, which is right at the top of the stairs on the second floor. We will have snacks. Oh, we always have snacks. So I hope you join us. But please join me in thanking Mónica, Guzmán, and our panelists. All right. Thank you to all of you for joining us. I hope to see you at 8 o'clock. We watch the debates.